one, everybody. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Sin Windy with his amazing talk, which will be an amazing talk on OSINT and dark web markets, why OPSEC still matters. So the floor is yours, Sin Windy, and welcome to your CONINT.
Hey, Stu. Thank you so much for the introduction. So thank you everybody for joining me. As Stu said, this is actually my first public talk. I am really excited. And so we're going to look at OSINT and dark web markets and kind of show why, despite being on a dark web market, your operational security really does still matter. So just a little bit about me first. I'm an OSINT practitioner. I come from a traditional intelligence background. And I've spent most of my career sort of bouncing around from different parts of the public sector, different military, government, and law enforcement agencies. And so more recently, I've actually switched over to the private sector where I'm currently a strategic analyst for a major tech company. And there I focus on a particular subset of cybercrime. I don't really have much of an online presence. However, your best bet is to find me on Twitter under the same handle as SinWindy. And on the bottom there, we got to have the disclaimer. Keep in mind as we go through this, everything in this talk, it's my own views, my own opinions, my own comments, and it doesn't represent anyone that I may or may not have worked for at any point in my career. All right, so first off, what is a dark web market? Well, in the simplest terms, it's exactly as the name implies. It is a marketplace that is hosted on the dark web. And so these type of markets are often attracted to dark web platforms, especially with Tor, partly due to the IP anonymization that Tor provides. And so it makes it just a little bit more difficult for law enforcement to identify their targets. These marketplaces also tend to heavily rely on cryptocurrencies rather than, say, traditional debit or credit cards. To make that money trail just a little bit more difficult, though not impossible, for investigators to follow. And while these marketplaces might contain some legitimate goods and services, instead, honestly, they tend to be stocked to the brim with more illicit items. Things such as drugs, malware, fake identity documents, counterfeit banknotes, user data, passwords, hacked and cracked accounts, those sort of things. And so I feel like there's this common misconception that dark web users are generally safe from arrest, right? Because, oh, hey, I'm using Tor, I have encrypted messaging, I'm using cryptocurrency. People think that they're going to be fully protected and they can sort of rest easy simply by relying on these technological safeguards to protect them. Well, that doesn't appear to be the case. There is absolutely no shortage of dark web arrest headlines out there. So, how exactly are these users being arrested? Despite what some people might think, these arrests are not caused by usually a flaw or a backdoor within Tor, nor are law enforcement agencies using some sort of like technological wizardry to identify these users. And instead, it tends to be good old fashioned investigative work combined with some failures in operational security that have led to the downfall of many of these dark web markets and vendors. So, keeping that in mind, what I want to do, we're going to take a look at three case examples of different users on the dark web in which they made some critical OPSEC mistakes. And then we're going to follow each one of them up with some tips and techniques that would help a new OSINT analyst in exploiting similar OPSEC mistakes, should they choose to pick up an investigation on a dark web market. All right, so I think honestly it would be a disservice to talk about dark web markets and not mention what is arguably the most famous of the dark web marketplaces. So I want to kick the case examples off with the Silk Road administrator, Dread Pirate Roberts. And so the Silk Road launched back in early 2011, and it was the first major dark web market to really take off. It garnered a lot of attention, both from the users as well as from law enforcement. And so this attention probably played a pretty big role in why the original Silk Road only lasted a little over 2 years before the site was shut down by law enforcement and the administrator, Dread Pirate Roberts, was arrested. So for this case example, we're going to look at one of Dread Pirate Roberts' more notable OPSEC mistakes, which is actually the reuse of online identifiers, and see how it played a role in his identification and later arrest. Okay, so during the course of the investigation into the initial Silk Road marketplace, special agents were just sort of poking around the internet in an attempt to locate some of the earliest known references to this dark web marketplace. They managed to locate two threads posted right around the same time as Silk Road's initial launch. One was on shroomery.org and the other one was on bitcointalk.org. So, as you can see, they both follow a similar pattern of wording, almost like an advertisement for the Silk Road marketplace. And they're both made under the same username of Altoid, and they were both made only about 2 days apart. So, the language used in these posts, it almost suggests users looking to attract visitors or obtain feedback on the Silk Road marketplace, with one of these posts even ending with the phrase, "Let me know what you think." And so I want to point out at this point, it's not too much of a stretch, right, to assume that someone posting under two forums using the same exact username, just posted days apart, uh, only talking about the same topic, that they could likely be the same person, right? So a couple months pass, Altoid comes back to Bitcoin Talk and he decides to post again. However, this time he's seeking to hire some IT pros for what he's referring to as a quote, venture backed Bitcoin startup company. I'll give you one hint to what that startup company is, one guess. So Altor provides his email, which is rollsolbright@gmail.com, within this post so that anyone interested in applying can reach out to him directly and follow up with an email. Well, we know now that this email address posted by Altoid was later associated to the Silk Road admin's real identity. And it was kind of one of those puzzle pieces that allowed law enforcement to identify this marketplace administrator. Agents were able to pivot off of this email address to find Albright's other social media profiles, some of which contained additional information that sort of corroborated the suspicion that Albright was indeed Dread Pirate Roberts. And so one of the bits of information that really strengthened this theory was this apparent shared interest for the Mises Institute. And Dread Pirate Roberts' signature on the Silk Road forum included a reference to the Mises Institute. Well, investigators also observed while looking into the Ross Albright email that the Google Plus account and the YouTube account associated also included a playlist that, oddly enough, had a video posted by the Mises Institute. And so, admittedly, this is all very circumstantial. However, having some of these threads, along with some other things to pull on, it allowed law enforcement to eventually put Albright under surveillance, and they were able to actually confirm him as Dread Pirate Roberts later on. So, knowing this, let's take a look at how we can take some similar steps to collect and pivot off of very similar breadcrumbs in our own investigations. So, as we saw in our Albright example, users tend to reuse identifiers, whether it's usernames, email addresses, whatnot, across different platforms. And this could occur for many reasons. It might be just due to laziness. It's convenient to reuse something you already have. You don't want to make a new account. But at the same time, it could also be due to maybe this prestige or some trustworthiness that you established under that moniker previously. And this is actually particularly true on the dark web where your reputation, especially as a vendor, means everything. And so because of that, you're going to be less likely to change your moniker as you move from marketplace to marketplace. Now, knowing this, we can actually search for similarly used usernames and emails to locate additional accounts for our target where perhaps they practice less than ideal OPSEC. And for dark web market identifiers, we don't really need to treat them much differently than those we already run across on the surface web. And instead, we can actually fall back on some tried and true methods. For example, we can use username enumeration tools, something such as what's my name, to locate the same username on a variety of different platforms. And I've also found that a simple query of that same username in quotations, run across a couple different search engines, tends to help catch many of those that these enumeration tools might have missed. For email reuse, you can also do the same, throw it in a quote across a couple search engines. I also find it's a very good idea to remove the domain at the end of the email and treat that as a username as well. For direct email reuse, you can also query some specific email lookup tools, something such as Melissa's data or that's them. One thing I do want to point out that is different though about a dark web target is we have already confirmed that they have a dark web presence, right? considering we originally ran across them on the dark web. So for this reason, I would also suggest running any of these identifiers you find through dark web search engines, something maybe like Torch or Recon, and also be sure to check the usernames on Dread as well, just to make sure you're covering all your bases. And then once you've located all the pieces, all the places in which a target exists, both on the ClearNet as well as on the dark web, then you can really start digging deeper into these profiles and their posts to gather additional information to pivot off of. Okay, so next up, our next case example was actually from Alphabay. And just for some quick background, Alphabay launched back in 2014. It lasted up until around 2017. And it was actually seized along with a number of other dark web markets as part of a big sweeping operation known as Operation Bayonet. And following Silk Road's seizure, a number of dark web marketplaces kind of popped up to take its place. And during this sort of, dark web marketplace boom that was occurring, they tried to learn from their predecessors' mistakes, and many started incorporating or enforcing the use of some additional security methods to try and prevent any further seizures or arrests from occurring on their specific platforms. And these methods varied from marketplace to marketplace. It could be something as simple as utilizing a more anonymous payment method, maybe something such as the cryptocurrency Monero, which doesn't have the easily trackable public ledger like Bitcoin does. Or maybe they require their users to encrypt all correspondence using pretty good privacy or PGP. And that's actually what we're going to focus on for our next case example. So even today, many marketplaces rely heavily on PGP to encrypt the correspondence between the buyers and the sellers. And this is to sort of mitigate the risk of data leakage. The idea is, should law enforcement intercept the messages or even seize the server that they're sitting on, that they wouldn't be getting this huge treasure trove of plain text messages that might have identifiable content, something such as the addresses used for shipping. But at the same time, this also opens up an additional avenue and an additional point of exploitation for OSINT investigators. And one such vendor that kind of learned this the hard way was the Alphabay vendor Dark Apollo. Now, this particular vendor was offering heroin and cocaine on Alphabay, and like most vendors, they posted their public PGP key so that customers could encrypt the messages that they were sending to them. However, Dark Apollo made a very fatal flaw when he set up his key pairs, and he generated them using an email address that, when you remove the domain, actually matched some of his other clear web social media handles. And this is actually one of the reasons I suggest, removing the domain from the end of the email and treating it as a username. So after extracting the email address from the public PGP key, law enforcement were able to find similar handles on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram that not only belonged to Dark Apollo, but it contained his real name and his current location information as well. Now, let's take this particular case example of Dark Apollo, and I want to use it to walk through the same steps to show just how you extract this information from a public PGP key. So for starters, you need a public PGP key. And you can get this a number of ways. Some vendors might include this on their storefront, in their forum signature. If not, you can actually also search for a PGP key if you know the username via the recon.onion website. And luckily enough for us, Dark Apollo's public PGP key is still available here via Recon. So as you see on the right there, that PGP key where it says begin PGP key public key block, and it is cut off, but you're going to want to copy all of that text into whatever the text editor of your choice is. Once you do that, you're going to want to save that as a .asc file. And so from here, you can extract the email or whatever other information was given when the user generated the PGP key pairs by simply importing that ASC file into software, something like Cleopatra maybe, or you can also extract it via the command line depending on your operating system. So for example, on a DB machine, you can simply open the terminal and run the command gpg -import and then point it to the location of your .asc file. And so despite many dark web users now being fully aware that there are risks associated with including real information here, I still regularly find legitimate ClearNet emails using this simple technique. And that being said, because a real email is not required here, users might put fake email. They might put a red herring email. You might find gibberish. And I personally have seen my fair share of not so nice messages that have been left for investigators. All right, and finally, for our last case example, we got a vendor here known as Canna Bars, who was on both Dream and Hansa marketplaces. Now, Canna Bars, I mean, he offered the gamut of drugs, everything from marijuana, codeine, Xanax, crystal methamphetamine. He had quite a bit of stuff on these two marketplaces. And a number of factors did play into his identification. A lot of traditional undercover purchases were done. They traced some of his Bitcoin cash outs. But I want to focus on a very particular photo that the vendor had posted. So the initial investigation into Cannon Bars began on Dream Marketplace. And during this investigation, one thing that the investigator noticed was that Cannon Bars actually had a review on Dream Market from what appeared to actually be a sale of on Hansa Market. And so prior to this investigation, the Dutch police had actually arrested the administrators of Hansa. They had seized the servers, and they were running this marketplace for about a month or so as sort of a honeypot to collect any additional information to make more arrests. So having known this, the investigator looking into Canna Bars reached out to the Dutch counterparts, seeking any information they might have on this particular target. So the investigator sends the request out, gets a response back, and while sifting through all this data, they came across a request from a potential customer, which was sent to Canna Bars, asking him for some additional photos of the marijuana he was selling. And in response to this, the vendor links an imager album containing some additional photos. Now, as you can see from the photos on the screen here, these images at least don't have a whole lot of information that we can pivot off of. They pretty much just show the product only. However, in the same imager album, there are a couple more photos in which Canna Bars is actually seen holding the marijuana in his hand. So, the photos you guys are seeing here do not do them justice. They are of a pretty high resolution, good quality. And so what law enforcement did, they downloaded the high resolution photos from Imager, and they submitted those images to the forensic lab. The lab then analyzed the fingerprints in the photo and found that they actually matched fingerprints already on file for Canna Bars from a prior arrest that was made. And so since these photos are still publicly available, what I want to do is we're going to go through some of the steps that I took, using nothing more than open source software to extract these fingerprints from these photos. And I do want to point out that although the fingerprints are known to belong to Canna Bars, I have still partially redacted them a bit just to give him a little bit of privacy. However, you should still be able to see enough of these images that you can follow along with how each step looks in order to replicate it yourself should you choose to. All right, and before we get started, I do think I need to reiterate here, you do need a high resolution photo for this technique. This is not CSI Miami, right? Zoom enhance will not get you very far if the fingerprint information is not already in the photos. So step one, what we need to do is we're going to upload that high quality photo into the GIMP photo editing software. Once you've done that, you're going to actually desaturate the image. And so the reason I do this is it's going to make it easier to see our changes as we go through manipulating the photo. Following that, we're actually going to want to invert this image. And the reason we're inverting this image is because we're actually wanting to extract the ridges of the fingerprint. We're not as concerned about the valleys. And so if we're gonna trace the ridges, we want them to be the darkest part of this photo. After that, we're going to really crank up the brightness and the contrast of the image. And as you can see, those ridges of the fingerprint are starting to kind of peek their way out. We're starting to see them a little bit, but we can still do better than this. So the final step we're going to take in GIMP is to apply a sharpen mask, and that really makes our ridges pop out. We're almost there at that point. However, what we're going to do is we're going to save this image, and then we're going to import it into Inkscape instead. Once we get it into Inkscape, we're going to apply the trace bitmap function to the image. And as you can see, it just removes those last bits of gray left and leaves us only with the black ridges and the white valleys of our fingerprint. It also gives us a vector that we can resize later for our comparison. And so that's pretty much the steps that we're taking to extract this fingerprint. But how do we use this information? So if you have multiple high resolution photos which have visible fingerprints you can extract, this technique can be used to compare the two prints for a match simply by resizing them. You can overlay them on top of each other or lay them side by side, see where they intersect, see where they match up. Keep in mind, though, that due to a photo's lighting and their shadows, you're never going to have a perfect match, right? And so for this reason, I'm actually more likely to use this technique to disprove a possible match rather than using it to correctly identify one of my targets. And as you can see in our example here, we got two separate fingerprints that have been extracted. When we compare them side by side down the middle, we can see that they're not in fact the same print. The bottom does actually match up pretty well, but as you move up towards the middle and near the top, you can see that the ridges don't quite match up. And so that's actually all I have in terms of case studies. However, before I open up for some questions, I do want to leave you all with just a little bit of words of wisdom that I find that are applicable, whether you're an OSINT analyst, a law enforcement officer, or even a dark web vendor. And that is simply that, arrests will continue until OPSEC improves. And so with that, yeah, thank you guys for joining me. I'll pass it over to Stu to see if we happen to have any questions.
Okay, my jaw just dropped, like literally for the first time in like a long time when you just did the fingerprints thing. I actually do. I have no reason to, but I've always been every time I took photos online and it's on social media and stuff, I always mask out my fingerprints anyway. Not because I have anything to hide, but because I don't want someone else looking at fingerprints as a way of identifying you and things like this, right? So yeah, I just can't believe people don't do that normally. But now I know why they do, because wow, that was super impressive, amazing. Um, okay, I've got a question while I wait. Oh, there's loads of questions now coming in, which is brilliant. Okay, I mean, for your first talk, can I just say that was phenomenal. That was an amazing talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
If if someone wants to kind of pick up on these kind of techniques, or wants to kind of get into maybe law enforcement investigation, things like this, what should they start doing to kind of pick up their skills?
I think for one thing is you should really leverage what you already know. For those that don't know, I actually started off with an art background. That's how I initially went to school. I did art and computer science. And so when I started looking into investigative roles, I looked into those that included, you know, for one, computer science. I did lots of analysis of code. I've used some of my art skills to not only extract fingerprints, but extract text from maybe an image that was a piece of paper that was upside down, and so you couldn't quite see what the image on the piece of paper said. But by using some known photo manipulation techniques, I was able to actually flip the image and extract the text to be able to read it. So I've actually been able to leverage a lot of my not so much investigative techniques and skills, but brought them over when I started doing investigations. So I think leverage what you already know.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, our background, that'd be really useful for this. Amazingly so. Rag's got a question as well. I might switch my camera on, so there you go. Rag's got a question. He said to me, have you found a greater degree in personal risk while from investigating darknet actors?
Personally, no. And this might be giving a little bit away here. I'm a huge fan of misinformation. So anytime I set stuff up, I like to use usernames, for example, to when you search them, that you're not going to get a hit. And Altoid with Dread Pirate Roberts is a great example. You do a Google search for Altoid, what are you going to find? You're going to find advertisements in the website for the Altoid candy. So I'm a big fan of using misinformation to kind of protect myself when I'm doing those kind of investigations. I also like to use, the standard, virtual machines, Tor, VPNs. Everything's a burner at that point. I don't reuse anything, whether it's a username, an email address. I also like putting numbers at the end of everything to make it a little bit more difficult, so I know I can't repeat it. But yeah, burn everything after you use it.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your kind of best OPSEC kind of, obviously talking about attackers making OPSEC mistakes, but obviously for investigators, what is your kind of top 3 OPSEC kind of do's, I guess?
Talk to your family first and foremost. You would be surprised how many people, especially people who are breaking the law, practice really well on their own OPSEC, and then you find out that their girlfriend, their spouse, their mother, most of the time actually practices horrible OPSEC, and you can actually go, once you pivot to their accounts, you can find so much information on your target that the target is actually not sharing himself. So always look for that person who's like one level removed. And in my experience, it's usually the mother who's the best, or sometimes the ex-girlfriend. Those are usually the ones that kind of lead them astray. Other than that, so after you've kind of cleaned up your parents and the girlfriends and such, have them clean up their OPSEC. Another thing that I think that's really really helpful is don't reuse your email for personal things and sketchy things. Um, if you're going to do something illegal, we always joke, if you're going to break the law, only break one law at a time. And so if you're going to make an OPSEC mistake, only make one at a time, because when they start stacking up, it gets worse and worse, and you're more likely to get caught. So you know, practice good hygiene. Don't intermingle personal accounts with sock puppets, that kind of thing. Um, and I think other than those are probably my two biggest.
Yeah, I think they're the things that catch people out, right? Especially don't mix your legends. Basically, is the kind of key one, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, I've seen those posts where was that employee from BBC or something like that that basically had a fake account and then actually logged in and managed to post the same reply to a thread with their actual live account or something. Yeah, it was pretty bad, right? Okay, I'm just going to check for other questions because this is amazing. I think you scared everyone. That's the problem. No one wants
Oh
to
no.
talk. With the crazy fingerprints. Okay, if I can't, any more questions before we wrap up? No. Okay. I think everyone's just deleting themselves off the internet, so you can't find them. So I think that's been that's a good talk, right? Sid Windy, look, seriously, that was a superb talk. Really, really good, really interesting. Um, I think you should definitely do more talks because it was fantastic.
Thank you, mate.
Seriously, and also you should bring back the OSINT Mondays sort of geolocation stuff, but that's just a personal thing.
uh, I got plans for that. It's in the works.
Okay, more questions coming in now. There you go. Okay, some questions now. Here we go. How do you build and age profiles?
Um, Unfortunately, if you're asking that right now, it's kind of too late. No. So it depends. I know I'm going to touch specifically on Facebook here because it's kind of the worst in my experience for aging. They usually tend to hit your sock puppets pretty quick compared to anybody else. Um, I like to use photos that's not a face, and you know, I know there's that this person does not exist can be helpful, but I think they're getting a little bit better at finding those. So if you're trying to use a female profile, maybe some high heels. If you're trying to use a male profile, I found that like those stock vector images from like tattoos work pretty well. And to keep from getting banned, you need to make it look legitimate. So if you come in early on with a Tor VPN node or something that just looks sketchy, you're going to get banned pretty quick. So if you can find a burner phone number to add validation, that's going to help out. If you can make it, treat it like a real account for a little while, like a couple things, maybe add a couple friends, if you're able to, just to kind of make it look a little bit more legitimate. And don't make too many changes at one time. If you go from having everything based out of, say, California, you put California as your information for your location using a California VPN, and then all of a sudden, you've pivoted and now you're in the Netherlands, that might get called out. That might be seen as suspicious. So make incremental steps as you're aging your accounts. Don't do anything like all at once.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah, I create profiles, right, uh, for sock puppets, things like this. So you have like a VPN profile for sock puppets, so you can log in from the same location each time.
Yep.
Another question as well. It's a bit of a weird one, so I'll ask it anyway. Have you OPSEC failed?
Absolutely. um, yeah, and I don't remember if I've mentioned this before anywhere else, but I made the mistake at one point of logging in. This was years and years ago. I logged into a sock puppet, and I had not turned on my VPN when I did so. And so I was coming off from the same IP address that my personal, at the time, was my personal Facebook account. And after like 2 or 3 hours, I saw my sock puppet actually pop up in the people you may know. so, so yeah, it's crazy, on the back end, some of the things they can use to kind of bring accounts together, such as, an IP address that says we're in the same location, so you guys might want to be friends.
Yeah, and that can also be useful for when you're investigating people as well at the same time.
Absolutely.
All right, I think that's it for questions. I just again like to thank you. Amazing talk, seriously. Oh, there is one more question. Here we go. I will do that question, then I'm going to wrap it up. Can you fix identity issues for people after cred's released? Yeah.
So that's not something that I really do. However, one thing, going back to misinformation, disinformation, I found that that's been very helpful. So when I go to scrub my information off the internet, it shows back up, days or weeks later, because there's another person who's selling it. And you have to kind of get to the source. I found that, kind of poisoning the well helps. If you can, when you sign up for stuff, I use part of my real information and part fake information, so that, when someone pulls like a LexisNexis report on me, for example, they're getting hundreds of pages with different names, different email addresses, some of which are real, some of which are not. It looks at that point like there's like 40 people living in a 1-bedroom apartment. So I'm a big fan of poisoning the well. Once your information has been leaked, it's kind of hard to bring it all back. So just kind of throwing some misinformation or some disinformation to kind of make it a little bit harder to get the real information.
And I think on that note, that's a perfect time to end your talk. So look, thank you very much. It is amazing. For a first talk, that's a blinder. Seriously, you should be proud. It's really, really good. Are you going to hang around for the rest of the day, or?
Yeah, I'll be here for a little while.
Okay, excellent. So if you've got any more questions, then we can ask that in the Twitch chat or Discord or whatever it may be. But thank you, Cinwindy. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for supporting our conference as well. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Stu.